Hello, Screamers and Scarecrows. My name is TB Skyen, and we have new information on the Fiddlesticks rework. Now, they've posted some updates about the Volibear and Fiddlesticks reworks before that I kind of didn't get to, but now the Fiddlesticks VGU team have posted an extensive and deeply fascinating overview of the character creation process for a VGU champion like Fiddlesticks. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to excuse my voice today. It's a little bit shot. You can probably hear it fraying around the edges. I'm going to be coughing a bit over the course of this video because, well, I've been using my voice a lot today, and this happens sometimes when you talk for a living. So, we're going to be talking about Fiddlesticks' update. We're going to be talking about some of the directions that they seem to be going with him, both in terms of character design and lore, the usual stuff that I talk about, and we're going to be doing as much of a deep dive as we possibly can on all the juicy, lovely details about the character creation process that Riot's artists have put into this post, because there's a lot of really good, fascinating stuff that can help give everybody, including myself, a better insight into how these processes work. And also, we're getting so much lovely look at his animation, especially, oh, we're going to talk about this one. We're going to talk about this one a bit. So, let's start with the basics. Fiddlesticks' new character design, which is pretty much, he's gonna be looking like this. When they posted this one in the last update, I thought maybe this was more of like a thematic direction that they wanted to go in rather than the actual character design, but no, this is the Fiddlesticks design that they've settled on. And the first time I saw it, I was a little bit like, I mean, that's maybe a little bit much, isn't it? Like, between the, oh, he's got the fork for a leg, and he's got this ripped and torn husk on the thing, and then the metal claws, and then the scythe that drips with dark demon blood, and then, like, the metal teeth and the eyes. Like I thought there was a whole lot of stuff going on there, and I was kind of like, maybe they should have focused on more on one concept. But I've kind of softened on it, because here's the thing. Every single character in League of Legends is a bit much. Like, they're all a little bit much. They're all a little bit overblown. They're all a little bit exaggerated. And the concept that Riot says they want to go with Fiddlesticks is to make him the horror champion in the game. Like, not necessarily like the demon, as it were, because we've all got all kinds of demons, but the horror guy. Like the guy who pops out of the brush and says boo, and then you die of fright as much as damage, you know? The iconic ambush champion. And in that sense, it's like, well, yeah, you know what, then you do go a little bit over the top, because League of Legends, and I know this sounds as a dig at Riot, and it really isn't, League of Legends is not a game for subtlety. Like, it's not. It's a game where you show your work on paper. Everything needs to be out there on the field. Subtlety is not for a MOBA. It's for other kinds of video games. So, you know what, yeah. You know, yeah, let's do the whole thing. Let's just throw everything at it. The one thing I'm missing, like the one thing that I kind of go I'm a little bit sad for, is that he doesn't look like a Scarecrow anymore. Like, he just doesn't. I'm sorry. He doesn't look anything like a Scarecrow whatsoever, because no Scarecrow has ever looked anything like this. And that's because they've deprioritized the whole idea of him being like an old sack of straw on sticks in favor of fully leaning into the fact, no, this guy is a hell demon who was conjured up by the collective imagination of every scared human who has ever walked through a wheat field. He's not a Scarecrow. He's the most terrifying vision of what a demon inhabiting a Scarecrow would look like. A demon vaguely imitating the shape of a Scarecrow. And so in that sense, like, yeah, you know, I could definitely see a different way to do it, but I think this works. And I do like the color choice a lot. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the post, but I do like the color choice of red and black as Fiddlesticks' primary colors. First of all, because red and black contrast really nicely with the, sort of the yellowed sackcloth that makes up his, air quotes, skin. And it stands out nicely against the sort of the dull brown rust of his metal bits, but also because it sets him apart from the Shadow Isles champions. Like, rather than the typical ghostly viridian teal, bluish, greenish colors that very much characterize the Shadow Isles, we've got red and black, which is the color of blood and the color of darkness, which those are good colors for a fear demon or whatever the hell he's supposed to be. It does, like, Fiddlesticks getting a rework that looks like this, that's designed to turn him into the iconic horror champion, though, does really, like, Nocturne desperately needs a rework of some kind soon, because what's the point of Nocturne when he is here? Like, oh, Nocturne is supposed to be scary. Oh, yeah, Mr. Dude with blades on his arms. Oh, no. Ooh, I am so afraid. I'm so glad that you're not in my nightmares. Ooh. Like, I'd rather have Nocturne than this. Just say, like, Nocturne is, like, probably deadly and dangerous, but this looks fucking terrifying, right? So Nocturne really needs a rework, and soon, because Fiddlesticks has just stolen his whole gig. Anyway, let's talk about what the post actually says. Here, to start with, they talked a little bit about Fiddlesticks himself and their thought process on the VGU, and specifically, they talk about, like, they want him to be the iconic ambush champion. So they're focusing his entire kit, at least as far as I can make out. His kit is very much focused around setting up the Crowstorm. Like, the Crowstorm is the core of his identity. He's the ambush champion. He jumps in, Crowstorm, boo, everybody dies, and everything else in his kit is set up to sort of rhyme with that on a thematic and mechanical level. No details about what his kit actually does, except that there is a point-and-click fear in there somewhere. But outside of that, you know, sort of just meditations on their direction for what Fiddlesticks should be. And here, they show us the proxy idle animation from the previous dev block. Again, we've seen this one before, and I do appreciate it. Like, there's two major concepts in here that I really like. First of all, that his anatomy makes no sense whatsoever. Because Fiddlesticks, and this is the important thing, Fiddlesticks isn't the body. Like, the metal body and the sackcloth and the face and the mouth and all that stuff, that isn't Fiddlesticks. This is Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks is the demon that is trapped inside the metal cage that sits in the middle of this thing, which tells me that his lore is going to be something along the lines of he's a demon who some humans tried to trap him, maybe some sorcerers tried to trap him in a metal cage or something, and then he found a way to break loose and just become an absolute terror or whatever. But Fiddlesticks is the demon inside the Scarecrow. He's not the Scarecrow itself. And I like that a lot because some of that is being communicated here. This is a proxy model, so it looks terrible, and this GIF is terribly compressed, but you can see how that idea is already beginning to manifest here. It's like, he doesn't need to be balanced, he doesn't need to be standing up in a logical fashion. There's no muscles to take care of, there's no center of gravity that needs to be managed, because this is just a shambling puppet being controlled by a terrifying hell demon that's trapped inside the cage on its chest. They also talk about, in terms of the story direction that they want to take, that Fiddlesticks wouldn't really make sense as, like, as a Targonian demon or something. Like, he wouldn't really make sense as part of some specific region's makeup. Like, it wouldn't make sense to make him specifically a Noxian demon, for example, because Fiddlesticks, like, who the hell? Fiddlesticks isn't someone who a warlock summons from the grimoire of Dreadlord Fiddle in the Middle. Like, it sounds like a children's name. It sounds like something from a children's rhyme or some old scary story that you tell around a campfire, like on Halloween night or something like that. So what they seem to be going for here is that Fiddlesticks is someone who doesn't have just one origin, but he's like this ancient hell thing that has been around since absolutely forever, and there's a million stories about him, any of which could be true or a lie. And they've sort of started to try and really lean into this. And they also mentioned something they've talked about before. Any type of voice it might have wouldn't sound like a person, but rather a projection. Just as a scarecrow is the rude facsimile of a human being, crude facsimile of a human being, its voice would be a crude mimicry of people it has come across or killed. Which sounds like a really cool direction to take his voiceover in, like just this cacophony of screaming voices of his victims. Very cool, sounds really hard to make listenable over long periods of time, but we'll see how they do. And so there's this little joke here from Jason Uyu Nangung, who's the character artist. Step 1, Megasphere. Step 2, there's Fiddlesticks. Which a lot of art tutorials can definitely feel like that, but there is a lot of good detail in here. This is the proxy model, which is the first sort of rough sculpted model that they made, like for initial testing, and like if there's some stuff that need to be checked out, like can this thing work in game, blah, blah, blah. He made this extremely rough model, and you can see that all the basic shapes of this Fiddlesticks is sort of in there. Yeah, he's got the scythe, he's got the fork legs, and he's got a long tongue hanging out of his face. We'll talk about that one later. And like the basics, but you can also see that when you look at it, these shapes are extremely basic. Like, they're just completely unrendered, they're lacking any kind of detail, and they don't really fit together that well, because it's a proxy model. It's just the rough first draft that's supposed to form the basis for the rest of what comes after. It's kind of like doing a very quick pencil sketch when you're drawing physically. And then from the proxy model into the high poly render. And here you can see they start to add all the details. They start to really work out, okay, here's the mechanical details of the claw arm, here's how we want to fit the legs together, here's how we want everything to sort of work in a physical sense. This is the more refined process. And then from there, they take the high poly model and then they really start to work on bringing everything together. And what I love about this process GIF, and I wish I could zoom in on it better, is especially when you pay attention to the metal here. Like, we go from the flat nothing here. Pay attention to the metal around the legs on the final phase. See what happened there. When they add the dirt and the scuffs and the textures, like that how much depth is really added to the metal bits of the character to really make it feel like it has volume and presence, especially in a lighted space. And for me, this is just fascinating to sit and look at. Now, one thing about Fiddlesticks, I'm not a huge fan of the tongue. At least not the tongue as in a shape of a tongue. I would have liked it if it was like a demonic tendril. Like, it's supposed to be these demonic tendrils, right? It's supposed to be these things here, like these demonic tendrils of Fiddlesticks' demonic body that's kind of seeping out of him, that then comes bursting out through his mouth, but the way it's rendered just makes it look like a physical tongue, like a floppy, wet thing with spit on it, you know? And that kind of doesn't work for me. Fortunately, as far as I can tell from the animation that's available, it doesn't show up very often, so it's not going to be distracting or anything, it just needs to be there as part of the model. And that's when and this is where, like, we have the basic model, and here we get to show the acting of the model. And this is where Fiddlesticks really becomes interesting and comes to life. Because again, look at this completely fucked up anatomy, like these arms that bend and are way too long in a way that makes no sense. That's a really good evocation of that horror feeling that something like Fiddlesticks would have. And this is sort of, I feel like in-game, probably these bits are gonna look a little bit better, because right now they just kind of, like, they look like feathers, which is part of the visual idea that he has the crow storm, and the demon inside him is perhaps some sort of bird-shaped demon-ish, something along those lines. Therefore, feathers poking out of the back of his head in the shape of, like, these dark tendrils. I would have liked them to have, like, to just be completely jet black, like his scythe, and have red accents on them, and, like, it look more like they're sort of amorphous flowing, rather than being hard feathers. But that's one of the things with models in League of Legends, is, like, you can't always do that because the readability is king, and also this is a static 3D render and not the in-game model. They might apply some effects on that once we get to that point. And so that was how the Fiddlesticks model was created. You get to see him go through all the process of, like, rough first draft, and then into, like, a high poly render, and then we get into the digital painting of the textures and the creation of, like, the lighting and the shading decisions that go into really giving him depth and volume. And then on top of that, the visual effects artists will be working their magic, adding all kinds of flair to the guy, I'm sure. But the thing about this article that I really appreciated is that they talk about the rigging of the character. This is a discipline in animation, 3D animation specifically, that's rarely really talked about, and it needs to be talked about more, because it's, first of all, fascinating, and second of all, a really important part of how 3D animation work. Rigging is the process of taking this puppet, this thing that's made of 3D polygons and stuff, and adding control points to it, and adding algorithms and behavior scripts and stuff like that to make this, turn it from a static 3D model into a puppet that an animator can puppeteer. And so, on low-budget animation productions, sometimes the animator and the rigger are the same person. Like, they're very related disciplines, but the rigger specifically is the guy whose job it is to make sure that the thing can make the movements that the animator needs to be able to let the thing make, right? It's the difference between, think of like an action figure made of plastic, right? If the action figure has absolutely no joints anywhere on it, the only thing it can do is just stand still and pose, because you can't move any part of it without breaking it. But when you add joints to the doll, and the more joints you add, and the more different, like knee joints and leg joints and wrist joints, the more articulated the doll becomes, the more different poses and the more different things you can do with it. That's what rigging is. It's defining the ways in which an animator can move a rig around. And a good animator, of course, can work around a bad rig. Like, they can still make the thing do what they want. They just have to break it in a lot of really weird ways in order to make it happen. But an animator with a good rig, like a rig that can do everything that they want it to do smoothly and efficiently, can work absolute fucking magic. So, like, shout out to riggers everywhere, because they're the people who enable great 3D animation to happen. Like, more than anything else, like, they're the people who make it possible to make good 3D animation. And this is Daewon Ryotwoni Lee, I'm sorry for mispronouncing probably all of that, who has done the rigging. He talks about, like, When he sets up champions, he considers how characters move naturally. For example, Yumi's face rig can make natural and cute face expressions, and Senna's Ghost Cloak setup flows in a natural way. However, developing Fiddlesticks' rig was different. When we started to set up Fiddlesticks, who's basically a puppet, my goal was to create a setup that supports both unnatural and natural movements that feel similar to a demon or ghost. So Fiddlesticks, as a model, has a lot of different control points and a lot of different bits of the model that the animators can manipulate compared to Yumi, because Yumi has a different expressive need. Like, she needs to be able to make cute facial expressions, which means there's probably a lot of control points around the face of the character and specifically about how she can move her face and her eyes and stuff like that independently of each other. Fiddlesticks is a different thing because he needs to be able to make both natural and deeply unnatural movements. Because, again, they want to go with this horror theme, and this is something that you can really see in the animation examples that they put down. Like, this shit right here. This demands, like, a lot of rather specific rigging to make that work. Like, to make that hang together, there's a lot of control points that need to be there that you would never put into any other kind of character. And again, therefore the rigger is making a lot of creative decisions about what the character is going to be able to do. And they usually make those decisions in collaboration with the animator, obviously. But the rigger is the expert who has to make this stuff happen, who has to enable the animator to do their work. And another thing he talks about, which I find quite fascinating, is this is a form of procedurally generated animation, which he calls setup. And it can be kind of difficult to sort of see the real difference unless you look at the example without setup and the example with setup. Here, it's the jaw that is getting set up. And you can see what happens is the jaw is told to follow the movement of the head in kind of a smooth fashion. So you can see here how it kind of lags behind and is dragged around. And this extreme version, obviously, is way too much, but you can see how the jaw kind of jiggles around freely as though it's not attached to anything, as though there's no sinews or muscles holding it in place. That gives this much more of a fluid feel than you get from this version that has no setup at all, where the jaw is completely static. And that's a tech that was used to animate Fiddlestick's arm when he walks. Take a look at the difference between... Is there a higher resolution available? Nope. Here we have without setup. They wanted Fiddlesticks to do that thing that horror villains often do and just badass supervillains often do, where they drag their weapon along with them over the ground like this thing. He doesn't care about lifting it up. He doesn't care that it's dragging because it's not uncomfortable for him, because he's a demon. He doesn't have physical feeling of any kind. So he drags this claw along the ground while he runs. And you can see the difference where here, there's no... That setup, that kind of dragging feeling isn't there at all. So when Fiddlesticks' claw drags across the ground, it just follows him in a kind of static, stiff way. Which is sort of like, it's fine, but it doesn't really get the feeling across. Here they've got a little bit of setup sit in it, and you can see how the claw stays in place a little bit, how he pivots around it, how it drags behind him in a more natural way. And again, that's the rigger. The rigger is the person who enables that shit to happen. So when you see Fiddlesticks coming at you in-game like this, yeah, you know who to blame. You know who to blame for that. And that brings us on to the animation. That's Luke Hupp, who is the animator on the Beastie, and there's so much good animation in here. And again, I wish I could get this in a higher resolution so we could really zoom in on it. But the thing I want to focus in on Fiddlesticks' walk cycle is something that Who himself talks about, is that Fiddlesticks' body doesn't really make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense that he's got this nail and this fork that he's walking on. How the hell is that even supposed to work? So his walk cycle is really unstable, and you can see he does this kind of limp where the left leg kind of does a ka-dunk, 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 as he kind of drags himself along. And he's also being held back by the dragging claw that just kind of, that he has to pull behind him as he kind of pushes himself forward and heaves himself forward. And that's a big part of what gives him this, like, almost a hungry look to him, right? Like, it looks like he's so focused on moving forward, on moving towards something he can consume, that he just doesn't give a shit about anything else. He's just kind of... And that's, again, that's really good character acting, because it tells you something about who is this guy. Well, he's someone who's like, there's not a human mind operating this thing, not completely. There's something wrong here, fundamentally wrong. The anatomy doesn't make sense. The way it moves doesn't quite make sense. It shouldn't be able to move like that, and yet it does. And that comes into play with this lovely thing. And we're going to look at this thing frame by frame, because Look at this. So what the animator is doing here, because again, like we talked about, Fiddlesticks is the thing inside the cage in the chest. And the thing inside the cage in the chest can also reach out of that cage. And so the concept that the animator was working with here is he thought about the idea that like, when Fiddlesticks is in this fast sprint animation, it's so wound up, like it's so fired up and excited and hungry and angry that it's just like, I have to eat, I have to consume, I have to destroy. It's so fired up that it tries to burst out of its own cage, and that's why the hands are out there. And you can see that in the way that the hands are animated as well. It's not so much that the hands are trying to walk. What the hands are actually doing, you can see it here, like they're grasping out, they're like, gimme, I want it. It's this driving need to get towards a thing where it's like it's reaching out, it wants to grasp whatever is in front of it, which makes it terrifying because you can just see how it's clawing itself forward. Again, much like the way it drags the claw behind it because it doesn't care enough to lift it. This is also a movement that just says, I don't give a shit about anything else except making it to the thing. Like, I need to get there. There's this willpower driving it that is sort of completely disconnected from any sense of self-preservation or comfort or care for anatomical rules or for how things are supposed to fit together. And here you can see where the tongue is coming into play, where again, it's because Fiddlesticks is in this hyper-excited mode where the tongue is just kind of bursting out of its head, not because it's trying to taste anything, but just because it's completely letting itself loose, as it were. And I love take notice of the back legs there. Again, you can see that same limping motion that exists in its main walk cycle is still present there. Like, you can see how the back legs they're not moving at a steady pace, like 1 2 1 2. It's more like 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Like it's skittering along almost, like it's running to try and keep up with itself, basically. And just the addition of extra limbs to any character instantly make them like scarier because it reminds you more of like an insect or some creepy crawly thing. And I just really like the deformation. Like, take a look at the deformation on the hands here. This hand is going to reach forward. And you can really see like how it's boring, this rubberiness that exists in it that really gives it that sense of thrusting desperation. Oh, I did set it to loop. That just like, yeah, that looks scary as shit. Like that's, you don't want to see that coming at you in a dark alleyway late at night, do you? I really, 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 really like this sprint animation. This is so good. Like this communicates the character, like that it's just a puppet with a thing inside it that is desperate to get to you. It wants to get to you, it wants to get to you right now, and it's not going to let anything in the entire universe stop it from getting to you. That is good scariness. Like that, that works. Then there's this lovely little idle animation where Fiddlesticks does his T-pose and stands around with a lantern swinging down. And again, we see the tongue being brought into action here. And this is a little flair that I actually really do like, where he settles into this quiet pose, and then he glitches. Like, it's almost like he glitches, right? Like he snaps from one position to another. It's just instantly there's no winding up to it. He just snaps from one position to another and starts like twitching around like a 3D character model that's clipping inside something that it's not supposed to, like a badly programmed video game character. And using that like as a horror aesthetic that's quite a clever little move. I don't 100% understand, like, it's supposed to be him sort of trying to emulate a scarecrow again. But again, like we talked about, his character design doesn't look anything like a scarecrow anymore. Like this, it's a reference to old Fiddlesticks, I guess. But for me, it's like a little bit, I guess some cool ideas in there, but it's also a little bit like, but he's not a scarecrow anymore in any meaningful way, so I don't know. Anyway. Then we move on to the VFX artist, the visual effects artist, talking about how they chose to go, not to use the green of the Shadow Isles for Fiddlestick. They wanted the red to set him apart. And over the course of that, first of all, we get a look at his basic attack, where I was surprised to find that he doesn't use the scythe at all. But that's actually also kind of a cool decision to me, because you can see his two arms. He's got the scythe in one arm, he's got his metal claw arm, but then it's actually the demon inside Fiddlesticks' chest that reaches out and throws his basic attack at the enemy. So it does that visual storytelling bit that the puppet isn't Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks is the thing inside the puppet that wants to come out and get to you. And I really do appreciate those, like that really long, lanky, kind of broken nature of the arm that he uses to throw it around with. And we also, here's perhaps, again, much like the run cycle, one of the best bits of animation of the character. And again, I wish I had a higher resolution, because this is Fiddlesticks activating Crowstorm. And again, as the VFX artist says, like the concept here is that this is Fiddlesticks at the height of his power, right? This is his ultimate. And that's also the demon at the height of its excitement. So much like in the sprint cycle, when the demon is like basically trying to break out of its own shell to get to you, this is the same thing. He's so hungry, he's so excited, he's so full of rage and hate that he flips up like the sackcloth on his body and just starts to burst out of himself. These pawing, grasping tendrils of hate and darkness. And you can see how the whole puppet is like being pulled behind the demon as it's just like, I need to get there, I need to get there, I need to get there, I need to kill. Vroom. Like that right there, like that, again, that's good scary. Like, that's some terrifying shit, man. And then we get there with Fiddlesticks. And one little interesting detail, I like the opposing movements of the birds. Like, the birds on the outside are moving clockwise, then we have some birds moving counterclockwise and some visual effects moving counterclockwise inside of the Crowstorm. That's a nice, like, without making it too chaotic, without making it impossible to follow, that still gives you that sense of chaos, that you've got this flock of hellbirds just flying everywhere and trying to kill everything. Like, isn't that just one of the coolest fucking ultimates in the game right there? Isn't it? I think it is. And I also like that you can see how when Crowstorm is active, Fiddlesticks' movement cycle changes. And you can see, again, they're doing that thing with, like, the demon trying to break out of the cage. It's not as extreme as it is during the sprint cycle, but it's still that same concept that, like, when he's super excited during this phase of his combat, he has that different attitude where the demon is even more in control of the puppet, or rather, even more desperate to break free of it. So yeah, that's the information we have on the Fiddlesticks update. Like I said, I was sort of lukewarm on the design to begin with, but I've come around on it, because ultimately, fuck subtlety. Like, who needs subtlety when you can have, like, all of this nonsense, all of this madness and craziness? Who needs subtlety when you can have that? So I'm excited to see Fiddlesticks in action. I'm excited to do a What's the Deal video for him properly, and hopefully Timo.gg's animation viewer can handle Fiddlesticks and all of his many animations, because I want to dive into that. I want to talk about that. And by the way, like, animator at Riot, what was your name? Luke Hop, if you're watching this video, please, if I can get a look at Fiddlesticks, like, before he releases, please, I want to see. I want to know how you did this. I want to interview you. Like, if you want to talk about Fiddlesticks, my channel is open to you, because hell yeah, this is so good. I love this. I want to know how you did that. Anyway, my name has been TV Sky, and I'm gonna quit this excited rambling before it goes much over half an hour. But if you have enjoyed this excited rambling about the Fiddlesticks update, you like, comment, and subscribe buttons. They're right there. They make the numbers on the channel go up, and numbers on the channel going up is the thing that YouTube cares about more than anything else in the universe. So that's super helpful to me. If you want to support the channel in a more direct way than just making numbers go up on YouTube, then you can make the numbers go up on my Patreon. We can sign up for a monthly donation of anything that you want to help me out, basically help me pay the rent. And if you don't want to do a monthly subscription, I have tip jars as well, where you can give me a one-time tip to say, hey, you got really weirdly excited about a demon puppet that wants to kill you. Do you have some psychological problems you need help with? Here, some money for therapy. That's a thing you can do over there. What else? Right, I have a merchandise store. That is also I keep forgetting to plug that thing. That's down in the description. You can go there and check out. There's some shirts and mugs and things. If you want that, I've got some of them myself. The shirts are really comfortable. So, yeah, I'm really bad at pitching myself, aren't I? Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, then you can hit the dislike button down below. And don't worry if you see a dark and beady eye poking out from beneath the shell of this thing we call the dislike button. Don't worry if you hear it scream when you touch it. Don't worry if you remember it in the dead of night for no reason. Don't worry if you feel like you see it lurking in your bathroom mirror right behind you, just out of sight. Don't worry at all. Worrying is what gives it power. Thank you very much for watching.